and you're ready to roll whenever you want
Well,
to
let's
go.
get it because we
All
got to get
right.
out of here exactly at 7:30. So I want to leave time for questions and comments. So I'm gonna be boogieing until y'all say, "Hey, hold on, Vicky. I want to ask a question. I got a comment." So I'm Vicky, and what I've been doing for a while is integrating the humanities into my social studies curriculum. So art, music, theater, dance, literature, everything. And what happened was I just started going to conferences and people wanted some tips on how to integrate the humanities. And it really comes from this course, this curriculum I developed called African American Cultural Humanities, AC. It's an accelerated course. I didn't start the course, but I developed my own curriculum. And so for every unit in the US history curriculum, there's a music and art lesson to go along with it. Any questions about that? It's accelerated. It's 1 year US history, 1 year literature. So it's a Black course and it's team taught. Any questions about that? Comments? It's accelerated, so it's intensive, so you really push the students. And you can do that if the curriculum is juicy and interesting and you scaffold. You really have to scaffold. And by the end of the year, you really want to have them on like a graduate level. By 11th, the end of 11th grade or senior year, you can have the class also. Any questions or comments about that? All right, so you see the title is called From Mali to Motown. So I'm going to look at 2 time periods. And I'm going to start with Mali and look at the story we tell when we start US history. How do you all start US history? Can you put in the chat some of the things you do to start off your US history course? Now you watching that, right, Stan?
I'm looking at it like a hawk.
Okay. You know, I feel. Now, this handout on the right, I see this a lot in US history. And what do you think could be problematic with this handout? Put in the chat what could be problematic with this handout, especially when you're thinking about terminology. And you get a hint if you look at the bottom of my screen and you see terminology.
So Vicki, someone said they start out with pre-colonialism when they start.
Okay, what's pre-colonialism?
Allison, do you want to unmute and tell us what that means to you?
Sorry, I had to find the unmute button. I meant to say pre-colonial America, but but it came out pre-colonialism. So basically, I go over very, unfortunately, not as long as I would like to go over it, but going over like who lived here before the Europeans tried to come over. So American groups, especially centered in Massachusetts and Virginia, because those were kind of the 2 places that we start talking about.
Okay. Now, what do you do with the Africans?
Africans, we go over usually in 7th grade. So the year before, we've gone over African kingdoms and all of that. I do bring up that people were captured and kidnapped in Africa, brought over in 1619. So that ends up usually happening after we start talking about, okay, Europeans came over, colonized, and then we talk a little bit about that as well.
Okay. So make sure you do a little bit of review, even though you can't fit a lot in US history. And sometimes we have to start after Reconstruction to fit everything in, but just a little review talking about West Africans.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about the meeting of 3 cultures, which it sounds like you all do, and just be mindful of terminology. And we use enslaved Africans. We don't just use slaves because every group was enslaved. So you want to be real specific there with enslaved and kidnapped Africans. Also, we don't use the word tribes. You can say nation, monarchy, civilization, clan, etc. And it sounds like you use indigenous. And then also Western Europe, and not just Europe, So you want kids to understand the difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. All right, any questions about that? Any comments? All right. So when you do your little review, you want to just talk a little bit about what West Africa was doing during the Middle Ages. So this art comes from the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Art. Usually when I do presentations, I match the museum to where I'm going. So if I'm in San Diego, I match it to the San Diego Museum of Art. So this is just art from the Detroit Institute of Art. So what was going on during the Middle Ages and what was West Africa doing? They were the center of world trade during the Middle Ages. So I use geography with every lesson. And again, I use a piece of art for every lesson too. Now, this is a French diptych from the 14th century, right in the Middle Ages. And it's made out of, what do you think? What does it look like? Take your mute off or put it in the chat. It's not plastic. It's not pearl.
Allison's
Ivory.
guessing marble or clay.
Ivory.
Ivory from West
Ivory.
Africa. So we know that West Africa was a part of world trade during the Middle Ages. The French were making these as part of daily meditation and worship. And so it is made out of ivory from West Africa. And so I use maps, geography, and the art tells us that West Africa was part of this world trade. And the Africans and the Arabs were part of this trade that went across the Sahara Desert. And they were able to use camels and navigate the Sahara Desert. And so it was difficult for Western Europe to get below the Sahara Desert to control this trade during the Middle Ages. So this shows West Africa as part of world trade. And then when I tell the story, I talk about this map that the Arabs created, where West Africans saw this wealth below the Sahara Desert, and they see Mansa Musa, one of the richest men that ever lived, and he's holding a big old piece of gold. Western Europeans wanted to get to this wealth. They could not navigate across the Sahara Desert. So which way do they think about going to get goods for trade? What do you think? Say it or put it in the chat. Western Europeans want access to this wealth. They can't navigate the Sahara Desert. They don't know enough about camels and navigating by the stars. So they set sail. Portugal and Spain set sail, all right? And Spain is led by Columbus. Now, to the left, these are some weights. These are brass weights that are at the Detroit Institute of Art that was part of this trade with West Africa. We have one of the largest collections of these brass weights at the Detroit Institute of Art. And they have these images that West Africans decorated them with. We don't know what the images mean, but we do know that West Africans had to put this artistic twist on these brass weights as part of this trade during the Middle Ages. So Mansa Musa, one of the richest men that ever lived, from Mali in West Africa. So you just want to be able to expose kids to Africans as human beings before they were kidnapped, enslaved, and brought to the colonies. Any questions? And it depends, you know, you might spend a couple days on it, you may be able to spend a week on it, but you want to make sure if it's covered in 7th grade during whatever social studies class they have, you still want to do a recap in the next grade level in their next social studies class. So West Africa, the center of world trade because of the gold wealth. When I show these kids this gold, their heads pop off their necks. What? Look at that. Wow. This is the image of the West African you want them to have, okay? It's an image I didn't have growing up in school. How many of you saw images of the West African in school? K through 12. What do you say? take your mute off or put it in the chat. Did you see any images of the West African before being kidnapped and enslaved and then brought to the Americas?
I was shown Mansa Musa stuff, and that was about it.
Okay, that's better. And I didn't have that in high school or college. So I talk about the real Lion King, and again, I might take a week on this, at least 3 days. I have to show these kids this image of the West African. Who the real Lion King is. The real Lion King is from Mali. His name is Sunjata Keita. And I tell the kids, I can't stand Disney. I don't like it. Why you don't like Disney? I loved it. Because you saw the Lion King movie. Yeah, I loved it. The song, I loved it. Well, what did it teach you about Africa? Nothing. Well, all right then. The Lion King was a real African king from Mali. He was Mansa Musa's uncle. All right. So in the DIA, we have this ring. It's showing the king's wealth, showing that West Africans communicated by pictures and images. And I don't know if you can see this staff over here, but this is the linguist staff. How do we know about Sunjata Keita, the real Lion King? Because of the griot, or the storyteller, that was part of West African culture. Every king, every family had their own historian and griot and storyteller and teacher. And he carried this linguist staff that has gold at the top of it. And so again, you may be able to spend a day or two, you may be able to spend a week, but it's very important that these kids see an image of this West African as a human being, as wealthy, as a part of world trade, etc. Any questions, comments, anything? All right, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. In US history, you really can't go too much into these three nations. You, of course, should go very in depth when you're talking about kingdoms in world history, or if you have an African civilization class. But for US history, at least a day or two on Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, great civilizations in West Africa. And Sunjata Keita, the real Lion King, comes from Mali. Timbuktu is a learning center. Now, the course I teach is accelerated and it's intensive, and I killed them. I work them hard. But the only way I can do that, one, the class got to be interesting, but two, I have to show them role models. So they have to know about Timbuktu and Mali being a center of learning, and Africans coming from this area of the world to the Americas. So I can only push them if I show them role models and I show them West Africa as a center of learning. All right, any questions, comments? All right. This is a map of some other kingdoms. And even though you're in US history, you can't cover any of them. You at least want to show them the greatness of Africa, you know. All right, so in the Detroit Institute of Art, this is one of my favorite pieces. This is in my top 5. And this is the Adoration of the Magi, done in 1525. And again, you can't spend a lot of time on this in US history. You can do a lot with world, but this is to show students that before colonization, people didn't describe themselves by their skin color. It was insignificant. You would describe yourself from your region or your religion, you know, the Christian, the Spaniard, but not by skin color. And we know this by looking at European art and how the African is portrayed in European art. So this is done in 1525, the 3 wise men, and you see the African over here with his gold, and he looks just as fine, or if not finer, than the others. All right, so again, you're showing this image of the African before coming over to the colonies. Any questions or comments? Adoration of the Magi. All of this is online, so you can pull it up online when you go to the Detroit Institute of Art website and pull up Adoration of the Magi. There may be different versions, but you want the one in 1525 by Van Cleve. And it's a wonderful book that looks at how the African is portrayed in Western European art.
Hey, Vicky, it's Stan. Again, I think it's a way to show the students how, in this particular picture, those images are similar. So,
Yeah.
like you said, again, the richness of the gifts and so forth, like that, that those are similarities that people have.
Oh, yes. You can really, you can just show the kids. We have something called VTS where you can just have kids talk about what they see, you know, and you can have, all types of questions to pull all of that out. Yep, exactly. Any other comments or questions about how this idea of race is fairly new and comes up after the Middle Ages? Questions,
Not gonna
comments?
lie, I feel a little cheated. I wasn't taught this before today,
Well, that's why I'm here.
and bless you for it.
Michigan, we have the best social studies group around. We, especially when we connect to places like the Detroit Institute of Art, and I do this during professional development. So just keep us in mind, and let's do a virtual tour with your classroom, or we can, email me. We can go over some pieces you want to incorporate in your curriculum. Any comments, questions? Because I'm still in Mali, I ain't got to Motown yet. All right, so at some point you want to talk about the social versus biological construction of so-called race. Now, this would be nice if you did something interdisciplinary with science, and you're talking about, there is no biological construction of race. We are not biologically different from each other. I mean, we can't be classified in different species of humans. And that's where you have your science teacher come in and you develop a lesson together where they can help you explain it, but there's a social construction where society has created this idea that skin color tells us something, but there biologically there is no race. There are no racial differences. And so throughout the course, we look at how society has made skin color important and that type of thing. So the status of Africans and indigenous populations changed after 1492. Socially, how people are viewed as citizens, and politically, rights denied or given to people based on skin color and this idea of race. Economically, there are some differences, and educationally, there's some differences that still exist with us today. So when you look at the biological construction of race and you get that out of here, get that mess out of here, and you just look at how we as a society have made skin color important, you use that to trace politically what we've done based on this construction. Any questions, comments? All right, when you talk about modern slavery, make sure you don't just say slavery, because slavery, everybody enslaved everybody. White folks were slave, Asians, everybody. So you don't want it to be slavery and it's just Black folks. Because I tell the kids, don't look at me, I wasn't no slave. And so we're looking at modern slavery. And make sure that you familiarize yourself with the term the African diaspora, because Africans weren't just brought to the United States. When you go to Jamaica, some Africans, Mexico, Costa Rica, Brazil, obviously, Africans were brought throughout the Americas. And that terminology is Americas. I don't just say America, Americas. And they have to learn all of this on a map, all of this on a map. So they can look at similarities, differences between stories. What was colonization and life like in Brazil and Cuba and Harlem, Chicago, Mississippi? There's similarities and differences. Now, the similarities come from what we call West African carryovers. It's culture that Africans brought over to the Americas. So if you are in Mississippi, you will see Black people. They may still do this. I don't know. Maybe I ask my mama. I don't know. But they eat greens and cornbread with their fingers like this. Anybody know people that do it? Some old school white folks from the South, I think, do it too. Anybody familiar with that? Eating greens and cornbread, mixing it up like this. This comes from West Africa. Spirituality, you see similarities between Africans in the United States and Brazil and Cuba. Music, the drum, the beat, just a lot of similarities that you see and we can trace back to West Africa. So that becomes very interesting when you're looking at music and rap. I always ask them, where did rap start? Started in West Africa with the griot, the storyteller, telling stories to music, etc. Any questions or comments? The African diaspora. Why is Black people in Jamaica?
Vicky, again, the idea that the disbursement of these peoples, again, they were dispersed from that land, but they still carried with them, again, all the parts of culture.
Mm-hmm. And didn't even know it, we didn't know. We didn't know when we went, say, to Puerto Rico, and you go to a religious service and people are getting happy. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but in the Black church, it's a lot of music and singing and dancing during the service. And well, I won't talk too much about getting happy, but you see similarities when you go to Brazil or Cuba, Puerto Rico, the similarities in how we worship. All right, any questions, comments? All right, I left Motown, or left Molly, now I'm in Motown. So the beginning of US history and how you portray Africans in world civilization is very important. Another area I see as a challenge for educators is teaching the civil rights movement. And I run into educators who will say things like, I don't know how to teach it. I'm scared I'll say the wrong thing. So I just don't teach nothing. So it's that fear of messing it up or whatever. But the civil rights movement is a unit that should take at least 2 weeks. It's so rich, you really could take up a year. So I start the unit and professional development the same way. How do you think your students would answer these questions? What is the civil rights movement? What definition would they give? How many civil rights organizations could they list? How many key players could they list? And when I have them do this, you can't put Martin Luther King on there and you can't put Rosa Parks on there. Now, how many civil rights key players can you list? And then list and explain the successes and failures of the civil rights movement. So how would your students answer it? How would you answer it? How many key players can you list? How many organizations can you list? Unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I don't hear nothing.
They might still be thinking or gathering
Oh,
their
they think.
thoughts there.
I don't remember the person's name, but I know like a little bit about them. Is that I go with?
I would tell kids they could do that, and I would say spit it out. What would you say?
There was the guy who worked alongside Martin Luther King Jr. He was he was gay and he worked alongside him, but I am blanking on what his name was.
Bayard Rustin.
Thank you.
Go ahead. And then, of course, I would tell students that's awesome because you acknowledge that King didn't do it himself. All right, what else? What's the civil rights movement? What are some organizations, key players, successes, failures?
I'm seeing John Lewis and Ruby Bridges and Jesse Jackson and Coretta King.
Yeah, good. All right. And then I tell kids there's no wrong answers, but what's good with students and doing professional development allows both groups to measure their own learning. Before we started the unit, at the beginning of professional development, I didn't know as much as I thought I knew or as much as I wanted to know. And it allows kids at the end of the unit and at the end of professional development to say, wow, I really learned a lot. So students, again, the course I teach is African American Cultural Humanities AC. It's an accelerated course. So they need to know these 4 major civil rights organizations. They need to know what the letters stand for. They need to know the date that they were established. And for each, they have to know their strategies. And for each strategy, what was the reasoning behind using that strategy and what was the result? So they have to know that code. And this is when they start to think they really cute, because I tell them, most people can't list these organizations. Most people don't know this information. So don't you ask nobody grown about this stuff, because they ain't gonna know. You're gonna embarrass them. So what do the kids do? What do they do? Unmute.
Oh, we
Tell
ask
me.
him.
They
There
ask
they
them.
go. Running up and down the halls. Every teacher they can find. Their mama, and then when they see they know some grown folks don't know, now they bugging me. More. You can trick kids into working hard. All right. So NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of, unmute.
Colored people.
There you go, colored people. CORE, Congress of Racial. Unmute.
Quality.
There we go, Congress of Racial Equality. SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership.
Conference.
There you go. And SNCC, Student Nonviolent
Non-violent
Coordinating Committee. Now, SNCC eventually turns into what organization? Because there's a shift in the civil rights movement. In the late 60s, early 70s, it transfers a lot of SNCC students to the Black Panther Party, all right? So they have to know these strategies. Now the NAACP, now what's good about them seeing these groups, these people, and all these strategies? What do you think it tells them about the civil rights movement? Unmute.
Not just king.
What else?
Is
and it was more
diverse.
than just a couple people.
Yes, what else?
It's everlasting. It's still happening. These organizations still exist.
Yes.
They're alive.
Mhm.
It's not done.
Mm-mm. No.
It wasn't like centuries ago, like same age as parents and grandparents.
Mhm. And it wasn't just one strategy, it was just so many different things going on in so many parts of the country and the world. And it helps them look at the civil rights movement differently, just if you have a slide like this that makes them look at things so differently, just like us. So attorneys, the NAACP used attorneys. Now you can't spend a lot of time on this. I can spend a lot of time on it because it's an accelerated course and it's intensive. But let's just look at using attorneys and using the legal system. So already you're looking at the 3 branches of government. Imagine for each strategy, you're helping the kids understand the different branches of government that they were strategizing against. So which branch of government is this? Using the legal system. They learn it's the,
Judicial.
there you go, eventually Supreme Court. Now the man behind this legal push is Charles Hamilton Houston. He was the mentor. Who was the Black man on the Supreme Court? Thurgood Marshall. His mentor was Charles Hamilton Houston. And Charles Hamilton Houston was a professor at Howard University. And he said, I am going to train an army of attorneys. And their classroom is going to be the civil rights movement. So he single-handedly trained dozens and dozens and dozens of African-American attorneys. Some of them are still around today. One of them is still down in Detroit. So Charles Hamilton Houston, using the Howard University Law School to train attorneys, and their whole focus is on civil rights. He also has to set precedents. You can't just go to the Supreme Court. So in all these different areas, he set legal precedents and said, now I've set the precedent, now you all can take it to the Supreme Court. So look at just how rich looking at the legal system is. And he was the attorney for the NAACP. He died right before Brown v. Board of Education. And the last little thing I'm gonna say about Brown v. Board of Education is looking at how Black people thought differently about education, because we didn't want integration. Some did not. A lot did not want integration. We just wanted equal schools, and we wanted them segregated. So we got integration, thinking if we can't have equality in our own schools, we'll look at integration. But integration was problematic because Black teachers lost their jobs. And we still suffer from a so-called achievement gap now that we have Black kids in these white schools. All right, questions, comments? So again, students need to know all this information by heart. They got to recite it. What do CORE stand for? Congress of Racial Equality. What's SNCC? You know. All right, we look at specific strategies. So this is the Freedom Rides. And again, students have to understand which branch of government these different strategies are trying to push. Now, sometimes it's a bunch of branches of government. And sometimes it's local, it's state, it's federal. Sometimes you have local and state going against federal. The federal is trying to push local and state. So you really can get into these strategies looking at the branches of government and the division between state and local and the federal government. Who's president during the Freedom Rides, 61?
Kennedy.
Kennedy. Very interesting how Kennedy, it was so hard during that time because you didn't want to make the Southerners mad, you didn't want to make the Northerners mad, and trying to balance that stuff out. Any questions, comments? All right. Let's see, music as a social tool. I have a list of music, and I use music and art all throughout the curriculum. But during civil rights, these are a couple, you know, War by Edwin Starr, of course, with looking at Vietnam, and then Wake Up Everybody by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and Come Go With Me by the Staple Singers. And when they're looking at lyrics, they have to look at social, political, economic, and educational issues. Because by looking at those issues in the 1950s and 1960s, even though you all have said it already, they start to see, well, some of this mess is going on right now, right? And then I think it's fun, once kids get a foundation, they can look at current music that they find is socially conscious, all right? Any questions, comments? All right. Now, civil rights and a call for white allies. Now, the civil rights movement we're talking about is from the 50s and 60s, but the civil rights movement started back in 1619 and still continues today. Always a need for white allies, always has been, always will. So I look at music and the arts as a way to call to white allies. So music brought white kids into the movement. Music in the 50s was segregated. Separate top 10 charts, separate radio stations, separate concerts. It was very segregated. But white kids always gonna get a hold of something they ain't supposed to get a hold of. So white kids would sneak and listen to Black music. It was called Negro music, it was Black music, race records, etc. And once they started listening to the music, of course, they want to go to the concert. And then concerts, when they started to have integrated concerts, they were separated by the aisles. Black kids over here, white kids over there. Again, what kids gonna do when they hear music? They mix all up and all kind of stuff. Eventually, they want to play the music. And if you want to play Black music, you got to come to us. Friendships develop, and you know what happens if you mess with my friend. So music brought a lot of white kids into the civil rights movement. Sports, In the 50s and 60s, when colleges and professional sports teams started to integrate in order to win, you know what happens when people become teammates. Anybody see Glory Road, this movie? I love it for looking at how sports brought white kids into the civil rights movement. Anybody see it? Comments in the chat or unmute?
I saw it, and you know what you think about it was the idea that success doesn't have color. It's like you just want the best. And where can you find that? Well, the pragmatic person says anywhere I can.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, right? Because that's the content of the character instead of the color of the skin. It's like, oh, I see that you have substance, and I want that on my team.
Yeah. And you know, once you be, you know, if you're in sports or other things, I know for sports, once you are a teammate, your teammate and your team takes precedence over skin color. TV, seeing stuff on TV, wanting to get help, to help and get involved. So the arts brought white kids into the movement. These are just some lyrics, the staple singers, and show their video. You want white allies, but they have to be ready. So the song says, I need you to come go with me, but if you're ready, you got to be ready now. All right. Any questions, comments? All right. Last slide. Southern Pasture and the Detroit Institute of Art, 1963 by Benny Andrews. Integration. We didn't necessarily want to integrate our children into white schools. We wanted equality, and we wanted them in the schools in our neighborhood with our Black teachers who were the aunties of these kids, the grandmamas of these kids, the older sisters of their kids. But we integrated, and it has been problematic in some ways, especially with the so-called achievement gap. We don't have a lot of African-American teachers, and we have situations with this slide that came from the US Department of Education, the Civil Rights Division. They have data for every school district in the country. I got this one from Tennessee School District. Enrollment in high school, not offering AP and IB. So we still have a ways to go. So you look at this picture by Benny Andrews, the tree is knowledge, information, the white school, the fence can represent a few things, whatever you think it is, but she wants her child to go to school and get the benefits, but her hand is on her shoulder, holding her back, because do I want her to be the only Black child in class? Do the teachers teach the greatness of Africa? Will she be able to play music and sing music that comes from our home? Or do we have to sing just Western European styles of music? And so the movement still continues today. All right, so any questions, comments? This is my email. Email me anything you would like if you need more information about something or whatever. Questions, comments? So it's 7:19. Now,
Yep,
Stan, I don't know when we end. I don't know nothing.
Well, you got 10 minutes here, so
All right.
we certainly could take questions from the participants tonight.
Questions, comments?
So I don't know if this is within your purview, but I've often thought of having a course illustrate the progression. Like, so I tried to teach an African-American history class from the perspective of movies. And I went way back to like 1914. There was actually a silent film made by a Black director. But is there like do you know of like organizations that put out like aligning music, movies, and so on and so forth to specific eras?
You know, no, I had to do that. When I started teaching African American Culture Humanities AC, there wasn't one, so I had to put it, that's why I had to do it myself. It's the only course like that in the country where every unit is aligned to the humanities.
I've even like emailed like, you know, directors and stuff, like, who do you think, like, I just wanted to know, like, from Spike Lee, what's the movie that you ought to see? Like, what's the like, I know Native Son is the book, right? But what's like what are the most important that you think is every child should see?
It depends. Now, one thing if I like Miss Jane Pittman, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman is,
Oh, I saw that was Cicely.
so that's nice because if you look at education and you look at social political educational issues, she starts with as an enslaved African, and then during Reconstruction, they have a small school. So Reconstruction lasts 11 years, and there's some progress in those 11 years, but Reconstruction ends, and the South tells the North, give us back the South. And so those schools are closed down. And if you try to learn, and this is all in the movie, so you can look at education after slavery ends, modern slavery ends. And then it takes you all the way up to the civil rights movement. So you can look at education and after modern slavery ends, why it's still an issue. So that's a movie where you can just trace from Reconstruction, well, slavery, modern slavery, all the way up to the civil rights movement. Any other
Awesome
questions or
sauce.
comments?
I missed the title of
Because the
that.
movie depends on what you want to show, and what time period.
I hate to jump in. My name's Scott Roberts. I'm a professor at Central Michigan University. I just heard the question about the movie. I just want to let you know, I don't want to take any of your time, Vicki, but I'm the series editor for a book called Hollywood or History from Information Age Publishing. We have 3 books now that shows how to effectively use film in the classroom. And one's about American history, one's about world history, and one's just coming about concerning cultural issues. We also have another book in the series coming out soon, edited by LeGarrette King, who's a professor at the University of Missouri.
I work with Dr.
Yeah.
King. I do consulting with him.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So he has a book coming out in the series as well. And it is about African American history and movies. So that be on the lookout for that. We're expecting probably a 2023-ish who date.
Who is that one?
LeGarrette King is the editor.
How do you spell that?
I'm sorry, what? LeGarrette, Lagarrett, King, King. And again, the series
And
is
tell
called,
them about the name of the center. It's the Carter G. Woodson Center for the Teaching of African American History.
Yes.
And they have a wonderful conference coming up in the summer.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
tons
it's
of
coming out.
information.
Yeah. But the series is called Hollywood or History. You can find it on Information Age Publishing. I'm also presenting Saturday morning, so you can get my email. But again, Vicki, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard a question about movies, and I wanted to share the resources.
Thanks.
So thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I'm not sure. I came late to this because the one I was going to go to did not allow me in. And so I don't know what the age group was really for this. I teach 6th grade world geography ELA. And I'm just wondering, for kids who are, 10, 11 years old, what would be a good starting point to get them starting these conversations that they didn't really get in elementary school, especially with the shutdown?
I would get some children's books on Mansa Musa, Sunjata Keita, books on West Africa. Just make sure you read them and they're, written correctly, So Sunjata Keita, Mansa Musa, maps on world trade, looking at art pieces, This is Adoration of the Magi from the Detroit Institute of Art, looking at, just showing them images of the African, in a positive light.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions, comments? We have 5 minutes.
I've got one.
Yes.
All right. So at the end of my APUSH year after the AP exam, we always end up doing a project on something important that has occurred in US history. And if none of my kids are choosing it, I'm taking Motown for the year because I refuse to make them do anything I won't do. Is there anything that you would recommend me getting starting on beyond just like my base knowledge, anything I would have picked up from college, but like something you're like, no, this is the amazing thing?
For Motown or just in US history in general?
Motown for like, I want them to have a better understanding of the music, not only like with its upbringing, those types of things. A lot of my kids love Motown and the music it inspired, and they know absolutely nothing about it. And I'd love for them to be able to pick up something.
I would probably see what you can find out on the Motown Museum website to see if they have any teaching guides or they have any books that give you an overview. And you might have to create things yourself, like a who is it board, or
Yeah.
Also what went into artist development, the dancers, who trained them, the etiquette, who trained them, the how West African culture played a role with people playing by ear, not being formally trained, the neighborhoods people came from. So that type of really looking at the lyrics, where they travel, that can be geography because they travel globally. The music style changing from the very first song to the end, you can see changes in the style of music, and then how it when they turn to film, what are some films that Motown put out, like The Wiz? I would definitely show The Wiz.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Anything else? We got 3 minutes, and my email me any questions or comments. I'm always available.
And Vicky, we'll get the PowerPoint slides from you and get those posted on the site. Okay.
All right. Well, I have just enjoyed myself running my fat mouth. So let me know if you need anything. You just send me an email, and I just want to thank you all. So,
And again, thank you from the Michigan Council of Social Studies for participating in the session. Have a great night.
thank you, Stan. You have been a lifesaver.
Glad to help you out.
All right. See y'all later.